Welcome to WP Theme Tutorial, episode 33. Today we're going to add a template tag to display our taxonomy images. We used categories in episode 32. Before we get into the code, I'd like to tell you about our new Facebook page. So I started a Facebook page for WP Theme Tutorial. I'd love it if you head over there and like the page. So going back to episode 31, we wrote some code that allowed us to add basically a URL to a taxonomy. So you can see we have a new field here when we're adding a new taxonomy, and we have one here when we're using a taxonomy that already exists or when we're editing a taxonomy. So what I've done in the meantime is uploaded an image, and it's this one right here, and I've saved it so that we can test. So the first thing we're going to need to do is we're going to open up, I'm in Sublime Text 2, and you can see that on my, what is this? This is category.php in 2012, in the 2012 theme. I've added a template tag called WPTT taxonomy header image. If we went to the page right now, you'd note that we're going to get an error because that function doesn't exist. So let's go back to our plugin and add it. For a template tag in a plugin like this, I'm just going to add it directly to the same file. If I'm building a large project with lots of different template tags, we're going to do lots of different things, then what I would actually do is have a special template tags file in and of itself, and all it would have in it is template tags. So here's our template tag down at the bottom. You can see that I'm just using it, and inside that I'm actually declaring my class, and I'm going to call a new function called showHeaderImage. Now, that doesn't exist yet either. If we come back up, you can see that all we have here is our basic stuff from the first screencast. So let's put showHeaderImage in. Here is showHeaderImage. And you can see from this that it's actually calling another function called getHeaderImage. And why do I do that? Well, if you're ever going to use these functions in a shortcode, shortcodes need to return the values anyways, or else it's going to jump up above all your content and it's going to display before the rest of your content. So what I always do is I add a show function, and all that does is pass directly to the get function, and I build everything inside the get function. That way when you're using a shortcode, you can call getHeaderImage in this case, and it would just show up properly on the page. So let's look at getHeaderImage. Here is getHeaderImage. So what does getHeaderImage do? The first thing it's going to do is check to see if we are an archive page, and if we are not, it's going to return immediately. I want to exit right away early. The second thing it's going to do is hit another function that you won't see yet called termHasImage. Now if the term does not have an image, then what we're going to do is return right away again. That way we exit as early as we can. Now you can see I've also declared this. And what that means is it's calling inside the class only. So if there's another function called termHasImage, we're not going to have a conflict because I'm calling inside this function or inside my class. And that allows me to name them without having to deal with the namespacing. And what's namespacing? So you see down here I did WPTT taxonomy header image. It's unlikely that someone else is going to have a prefix on their function called WPTT, although taxonomy header image in and of itself would be a fairly common name even. So let's paste in our termHasImage function, or I guess that's a conditional. Again, in a big project, I would create a conditionals file as well, and all of my conditionals would be inside a single file. In this case, since this plugin is doing one thing, we're just going to keep this in one file. So termHasImage. The first thing it's going to do is declare WP query as a global. That's because we need items out of that. The first thing we need is the ID of our term, because we need to be able to look it up somehow. So we're going to call WP query and query create object ID. And out of that I'm going to call term meta, get option, taxonomy, and I'm passing in term ID. Now if you remember from the last time, there isn't a special function to save term metadata. So what we did was we saved it with our term ID. So each thing is taxonomy term ID. And that's how I'm calling it again, taxonomy term ID out of the options database. And the next thing I'm going to do is if it's not empty, term meta, and I'm calling our tax image array item. Remember, we're naming it as an array here, and everywhere you can see it highlighted, tax image array, tax image. If it's not empty, I'm going to return true. If it is empty, I'm going to return false. And that means there's no image or there's no URL, because technically, I guess I'm not checking for an image. I'm checking that there is any data in there. So I suppose you could even put a random text string. Now, we escaped ours earlier when we saved with escape URL. So that's going to make sure it has http:// at the beginning, but then it would just be our random string. Yeah, so it would return false if it doesn't find anything there. So that walked us through term has image. Now we're going to declare WQuery again as a global, and we're going to do the same thing. Get our term ID by getting the create object ID, get our term meta by getting our option, and then we're going to have our URL equals term meta tax image. And then the last thing we're going to do is return our image with a source, and we're going to again call escape URL. You always need to escape on the way in and on the way out, and typically you want to escape as late as possible. That way I know that it's escaped. If this is, a couple hundred lines longer function, or even 10 lines longer, and I escaped way up here, say if I had 10 other lines in between URL and where I'm actually returning it because I need to do other stuff, then did I escape it at the beginning? It can be hard to tell. That's why you escape as late as possible. And that's what I do. So I call escape URL on my URL. So let's save that. And then when you refresh, you see I have a beautiful picture of my daughter riding her tricycle. Now that obviously doesn't have to do with our category here of ACI form, but in theory you could have it, so for a client we did with like a diving category for activities, and they could have a diving picture, or on a kayaking category they had a kayaking picture. So that's where I've been using this. In the next screencast, we're going to deal with what if you don't have an image, but we still want to display something. So we're going to define some random images in a folder in our theme as default images, and it's just going to pick one at random. Thanks for watching.